right, it is now 10 o'clock. It's time for us to officially get started. And everyone, most of you were correct. This is the Stonehenge monument in England. And just a note, we're going to look at it. We're going to hear a little bit more about the Stonehenge monument here in a moment. But if you're really excited about it and you can get here this Friday at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, we have a whole new exhibit opening just about Stonehenge. There's been lots of theories and ideas and stories about this monument, but recent archaeological evidence has allowed us to uncover the real story about it. So if you can join us, we have some cool stuff about that. All right, so my name is Mitch. I will be your host today. I'm so happy that you're here to join us. In a moment, I will introduce our narrator, Bob, and our pilot, Asa, and we were gonna fly all over the earth. But first, a couple of housekeeping things. The very first thing is I would like to acknowledge that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science is on the traditional lands of the Ute, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Oceti-Sakowin nations, and that lands across the world have been and continue to be stewarded by Indigenous people. Also, we have people from all over the country here today. Thank you for joining us. This is very exciting. Now, you'll be able to interact with us two different ways during the program. The first is that we'll have some polls come up that you'll get to vote in, and the second is in the chat. Now, we'd ask that you use the chat respectfully and only put in there questions that you'd like us to answer and answers to questions that we ask you. And you won't be able to see everyone else's chat, but we'll be watching them and I'll keep an eye on all your questions. And at the end, we'll answer as many as we possibly can. All right. So, Digital Earth Academy. So today we're going to ask you to imagine that you are alien scientists coming to the Earth for the first time to see what you can from space. So as we're about to get started, I'd like you all to put on your alien scientist hats and your alien scientist goggles. And I'd like to introduce you to our narrator. Oof, can't see anything with my alien goggles. That was a mistake. All right, our narrator, Bob Reynolds, and our pilot, Asa Erlandson.
Good morning, everybody, and we're delighted to have you joining us, and we're eager to share visions of the world to everybody. We know that you're scattered around Colorado. Many of you are in Denver, but some of you are probably outside of Denver. I think we had some people from Wyoming. You might continue to put in the chat. If you're from outside of Colorado, make sure that we know where you are, because we can sometimes we can see where you are as we go by, as we're flying around the world. And this Digital Earth Academy is a program that's designed to share the world's geography with you. It's a way to see the world from above. And today we're going to be thinking about what kinds of things we can see, man-made objects on the surface of the Earth. And we're going to be focusing on our ability to resolve them. It really means to see them. So we'll talk about resolution. We've got a couple of different ways we're going to address resolution, and scale means sort of size and shape and our ability to see things. So we're going to get started right here in Denver. And for those of you who live in the Front Range area, I hope you've visited the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It's a wonderful museum. And as Mitch mentioned, it's going to have an exhibit on Stonehenge that opens this coming Friday. So a brand new exhibit opening up. If we look at it from above, we're looking right now at the Denver Museum from a little bit, this would be sort of balloon level. If you were up in a balloon, it might look about like this. And the parking lot is on the top of the picture. There's a garden and a fountain on the left-hand side of the picture. And the right-hand side of the picture is Colorado Boulevard, for those of you who've driven up and down Colorado Boulevard. And the museum is a complicated building. It's been built in several stages, and it's got photovoltaic panels up on the roof. And some of those gray things that you can just sort of barely make out, some gray patches on the roof, those are actually photovoltaic panels where we're generating some of the electricity that we're using in the museum right on our own roof. But what we're going to do in this program, there you can see the photovoltaics, and we might see some more photovoltaics around the world as we travel around. But we're going to leave the museum as if we're going up in the air, up in a balloon, and we're to sort of be looking down on the Earth. And I want to invite you to think about what kinds of things you can see on the Earth that would indicate that people are down there. So if you're close enough, you can see buildings, you can see the park, you can see trees, you can even see cars and people if you're super close. But as you get further back up, as our balloon goes up into the air, you'll see that City Park is sort of getting smaller. That's on the right-hand side. And then the downtown Denver is coming into view on the left. And there are some interesting features that you can see in downtown Denver. You might recognize some skyscrapers. There's some smallish ones in Denver. There's a round thing there on the left. You might recognize that round thing. That's the Broncos Stadium. Some of you have been there. As we keep on going higher, though, we're getting up to a pretty high balloon level here, and pretty soon we're going to be up at airplane level. You'd be looking out the window of an airplane, which can be about 6 miles up. You look down and it's getting harder to recognize individual buildings, but you can still see the roads. You can still see that there's a city down there. But as we get even higher, it gets harder and harder to recognize some of the major features that we've built. So things like the roads, we can still see some lakes, some man-made lakes there along the South Platte River, but it's getting harder to see the museum. It's getting harder to see Denver. It's getting harder to see City Park. And we're going to ask you, as we go back up, we're getting up almost to super high airplane elevation. Pretty soon we're going to be up in space. We can go a little bit higher here, Asa, and we'll get up to about space elevation. Right around now, we're getting up near what you might see from the space station, which is almost 300 miles up. And it's pretty hard to see Denver. It's super hard to see any of the features that we saw a minute ago in the city of Denver. And here you can just see Colorado sort of as a whole image. You see the Rocky Mountains, you see the high plains. And I'm just going to ask you a question so you guys can participate here. And if we were up in space looking down at the Earth, I want to ask you what kind of things you think we might see. And I'll give you 3 choices, and we're going to work on these over the course of the next few minutes. But do you think you'd be able to see like the pyramids in Egypt? Do you think you might be able to see like farmers' fields? Do you think you might be able to see the Great Wall of China? Take a minute and make a poll here. So again, what kind of things do you think you could see if you're up in space looking at the Earth? Do you think you'd see the Great Pyramids in Egypt, farmers' fields, or the Great Wall of China? And I'll tell you, we're going to see all of these here in a few minutes, but which ones do you think you might be able to recognize most easily? Let's see what people think. So we'll just leave the poll open for 1 or 2 more minutes. Just click on what one you think you might be able to see, and then we'll go look. We'll do an experiment and we'll go look. So Asa, as we're closing up the poll, we can start flying a little bit to the east, just sort of keep ourselves moving here. Oh, look at that. Everyone thinks the Great Wall of China. A few people think farmers' fields and pyramids, but the Great Wall of China is the winner. So let's see what you can really see. Let's keep an eye on that. We're going to go a little bit east of Denver. We're flying sort of towards Lyman, Colorado. Some of you might have been out there, heading towards Kansas. And again, hard to see things here as we're coming down in, but there are some patterns that are starting to show up. And here from very high up, you're starting to see some strange patterns. And I'll invite you to wonder what they are. They're green. That's a clue. And these patterns, some of them are circles and some of them are squares. These are irrigated fields. So one of the things that we can see from very high up in space even are farmers' fields. And they show up because they're patterns. You can recognize circles, you can recognize squares, and those patterns are very distinctive. The circles are because they irrigate using a sprinkler that goes around and around. It's called a center pivot irrigation. And the other fields are irrigated in other ways. But these fields, in fact, some of these fields are wheat fields and they don't get irrigated at all. They wait for to rain on them. But those patterns, which can be, almost a quarter of a mile or sometimes a half a mile across, are very visible from space because your eye sees the pattern. You see a square, you see a circle, and they're pretty distinctive. And there's lots of people down there farming, and they're irrigating and they're plowing and they're harvesting the fields. These fields are growing things like corn, they're growing wheat, they're growing alfalfa, they're growing hay, they grow some sugar beets, and that's irrigated ground. We're going to continue our trip and we're going to fly east. So we're going to back out a little bit here. Asa's our pilot, and we're going to back out a little bit to go up to the higher altitude because we're going to make a jump to the east, and we're going to go see if we can see skyscrapers. So be thinking about whether you can see skyscrapers, and where do you think we're going to find skyscrapers? I'm looking in the chat room. People are going wild in the chat. Yes, skyscrapers. How about New York City? We're going to go to New York City, and we're going to see if we can find some skyscrapers in New York City. So we are going to come down. This is the east coast of the United States. Long Island is that Long Island on the right. And then there's a big harbor there, which is the harbor for the city of New York. And the city of New York is on an island called Manhattan Island. And it's got a big central park in it. It's quite visible from a distance. It's got to get a little crisper here, but we'll see Central Park, a big rectangular park in New York City. And we're going to, as we're coming down on Manhattan, I'm hoping that Central Park will show up a little bit better. It's going to get a little bit clearer. The computer has to catch up, but Ace is circling it there. Let's just eyeball that. It's a beautiful park. If you go to New York City, you'll have to go to Central Park and see it's got a wonderful little zoo. It's got a lake, and that lake, you won't believe it, but that lake is full of snapping turtles. There's huge turtles in that lake, and if you get too close, they come and snap at you, and you got to watch out. But it's a beautiful park, and it's been there for a long, long time. And the city of New York is very visible because it's in a grid. You can see, again, sort of rectangles and squares. But let's see if we can find a skyscraper. Asa is going to try and find a nice big skyscraper for us to look at. And we're looking for one that's over 1,000 feet tall. Let's see if we can find a 1,000-foot tall skyscraper. And it's pretty tricky because you're looking straight down on top of these things from above. Oh, I see something coming into view right there. And you know what I'm seeing? I'm seeing the shadow. You see how the dark area to the side of it? There's a giant building here, and Ace is going to see if he can get us right down into it. But that shadow is the shadow of what used to be the tallest building in the world. There's other taller buildings now, but do you guys know which building is in New York that's got a very tall, tippy-tip top? A very famous it's an older building. There it is. I'm seeing it coming in. Yes, yes. You guys are right. It's the Empire State Building. And here we're coming, there's a beautiful view of it from the street level. And you can see it sort of gets tippy tip top, and there's an antenna at the very top. And I think they used to try to land dirigibles on the top of the Empire State Building. But you can see we can get really close. The people are standing down there. You can see them standing on a platform looking out. And then there's the antenna, which is the spiky thing that's about to hit us in the eye here, is the very top of the Empire State Building, which is 1,400 feet high. So it's a super tall spire. And you can see people standing below on the visitor's deck. You go up in a fancy elevator to get to the top of the Empire State Building, and the view is wonderful. I've been up on top there, and you step outside there, and they have telescopes set up so you can look through the telescope and look at people down on the street. They look like ants, and you can use the telescope to see the people on the streets. But we've got to keep moving. We've got lots of places to go. So we're going to we've seen the skyscraper now in New York City, but let's go to another famous city on the East Coast. Some of you guys will have been there, and we are going to go to Washington, D.C. I see a question about what is a dirigible, and that's it's a big giant balloon. They used to there were hydrogen-filled balloons that were called dirigibles, and they used to fly them, and they could land, they could tie up, they could tether on the top of the Empire State Building. But we're going to go down to Washington, D.C., and think about what kinds of tall things we're going to see in Washington, D.C. And have any of you guys been to Washington? I think, oh, I see some of you are thinking about it. Yes. So we're going to try to find Washington. And Washington, D.C. is on the Potomac River, and it's a little bit tricky to find. So Ace is navigating here. He's going to find Washington, D.C. It's not as easy to find as New York is. So he's got to poke around, and you can get confused and find Baltimore, and you can get confused and find Philadelphia, but we'll find Washington. I'm sure that we'll find it here. And in Washington, D.C., one of the tallest features in Washington, D.C. is, as you guys have guessed, is the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument is not as tall as the Empire State Building. It's only about 550 feet tall, but it is a very prominent feature, and we're going to see it beautifully here in Washington because it's situated on the Mall. Many of you might have seen the pictures of the Mall, And you'll see the first thing you'll see is the shadow of the Washington Monument. You see the shadow, that dark stripe, and the Smithsonian is there, and all the museums are located along the mall, and that single spire there is the Washington Monument. And you can see we can come straight down on top of it. But because we're looking at it from above, the feature that you see most clearly is actually the shadow of the building. The building itself doesn't occupy that much space. So there it is, a beautiful tall building, and you go up. I've actually climbed up the stairs inside. It's a long climb up those stairs. And then you look out those little tiny windows, and the view it's pretty good, but you don't get as good a view as you do from the top of the Empire State Building, because you have to look through those little windows. When they first built the Washington Monument, it was made a long time ago, but it had a very fancy thing on the top. It had a super precious metal making the very top of it. And back in the day, aluminum was very hard to make, and they put a piece of aluminum up on the top of the Washington Monument because the aluminum metal does not tarnish. And so up on the very tippy tip top of the Washington Monument, there's a little pyramid of aluminum. So you can see the Washington Monument pretty well. You can see the flags around it, but when looking at it from up above, it's not that impressive, and the shadow is maybe even more impressive than the building itself when you're looking at it from above. Now, again, those of you who've been in Washington, D.C., you'll know there's another building that you can see right from here. If you look down the length of the mall across the reflecting pond, you see the Lincoln Memorial. And let's go look at the Lincoln Memorial. The Lincoln Memorial is one of the beautiful monuments in Washington, and it's a very beautiful building made out of marble. A lot of the marble in the Lincoln Memorial comes from Colorado, from the Yule Quarry up near the town of Marble. Again, from above, the Lincoln Memorial sits inside this ellipse. There's a road that goes around it, and it's sort of a rectangular building there. You can see the people on the stairs, but from above, the Lincoln Memorial doesn't look quite that impressive. You see the roof, but you can't really see inside. You don't really even know that Lincoln is in there. But we're going to use the Lincoln Memorial as a way to sort of introduce some topics about resolution and scale. There's what it looks like from the front. And it's a beautiful marble building, and you can just barely see inside the building. Abraham Lincoln is sitting in a giant chair. And when you go there, when you guys go to the Lincoln Memorial, be sure to read the writings on the walls, because Abraham Lincoln was a wonderful, gifted speaker. And he of course gave the Gettysburg Address, which many of you have learned. But on the walls of the Lincoln Memorial, there are quotations from Abraham Lincoln. There's wonderful words that he wrote and talked about. And of course, this is the spot where Martin Luther King gave his speech, the famous speech about "I Have a Dream," which I hope you've all heard. He stood right there on the top of those steps and gave that speech, looking out towards the Washington Monument. And when you see the pictures of Martin Luther King giving his speech, you'll often see the Washington Monument in the background. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to a video, and we're going to discuss a little bit more about size and scale and resolution. And you're going to see that we echo Abraham Lincoln and the Lincoln Memorial. So
things appear smaller the further away they are. Like right now, I'm about 10 feet away from my friend Asa, who looks just like Abraham Lincoln. And at this distance, his head appears to be the same size as Lincoln's head on a penny. Now, Asa doesn't really have a teeny tiny head, but it appears that way. And this is true all the time. But we don't go around saying, oh, there's people with their teeny tiny heads, or look at that tree, it's so small, it's like smaller than my thumb. No, our brains use all sorts of visual information to figure out how far away things are and how big they are. Like our brains know that if Asa were to hold up a penny over where he is, it would look teeny tiny compared to my, what? It's like the exact same size. Wait, what's going on? This is really weird. Is Asa's head really as small as a penny? What am I doing? Oh, it's the old giant penny trick. Gets me every time. Speaking of pennies, that building on the back of older pennies is the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. If the Lincoln Memorial were here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, it would be about this big. Now, how far away do you think we'd have to go so that the actual building would appear the same size as it does on a teeny tiny penny? Maybe to that tree over there, maybe to that other tree, maybe to the other side of that lake, maybe on top of that building back there, maybe on that mountain way back there. Let's find out. Here we are at the tree. We're still too close. Now here we are at the lake. We're still too close. Here we are halfway around the lake. And finally, we're far enough away that the building appears the same size it does on the penny. Now, did you know that if you look close enough at a penny, you can actually see Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial? Well, I can't. My eyes aren't good enough. But I work at a science museum where we have cool technology like this digital microscope. Using this, we can magnify the penny 200 times. And once you can look at it 200 times bigger, it's easy to see Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial. What do you think about that, Ace Abraham Lincoln? Cool. Now, can I have my penny back? Thank you. Don't throw it. Don't throw it. What? Whoa. Oh, it landed next to that tiny cell phone. How is that cell phone so small? That doesn't, wait a second. Ah, oh, it's the old giant penny trick again. Lincoln!
So I hope you all enjoyed our visit there to the Lincoln Memorial as we transpose it to Denver. And it's important to appreciate that things, when you look at them from above, have a different sense of scale and a different size as in terms of our ability to recognize them. We call that resolution. And I think that here, as we move away from Washington, D.C., you can see the shadow of the Washington Monument. But again, the Washington Monument itself, super hard to see. And we're going to ask you now to think about some archaeological features. And we'll ask you another poll. This is another poll to think about what you could see from above, what you could see from space. And I'm going to ask you again about Stonehenge. I'm going to ask you about the pyramids in Egypt. And I'm going to ask you again about the Great Wall of China. So which ones of these do you think you'd be able to see from above? And we want to get your opinions, but then we're going to go look. So you guys see which one you think we're going to be able to see from above. And then we're going to go look and see what we can really find. So do you think you can see Stonehenge from above? Do you think you can see the Great Pyramids of Egypt from above? Do you think you can see the Great Wall in China? We're going to find out, but let's see what you guys think. So we're going to start to move. Asa, we might just sort of start to move across the Atlantic Ocean here as we get the final results from this poll. And we're going to be crossing across the North Atlantic Ocean. You'll see the United States and Canada sort of sliding off to the left. And we've got Europe coming in on the right. Look at that. Great Wall of China is the winner again. So, and Stonehenge, people don't think we'll be able to see Stonehenge. I think you're right. Let's go see though. We're going to go to England. So thank you guys for the polling. We're going to go to England and we're going to see if we can find Stonehenge. And it's going to be a little bit tricky because it is, as you guys have guessed, it's a little bit hard to see from above. So you'll recognize England here in the middle, the English Channel, France is on the right, and we're going to be dropping into the southern part of England to a place called the Salisbury Plains, and we're going to see if we can see Stonehenge from above. Stonehenge is made of very huge rocks, and they're astonishingly difficult to move, but they were moved from great distances by people with very little technology. And it's an absolutely fantastic testimony to the ability to organize workers. And they must have had lots and lots of people pushing and pulling on those rocks. They might have used rollers. You know, they might have gotten the giant rocks on rollers like logs and rolled them along. But you can see farmers' fields as we come in from space. You can see now we're getting down towards balloon level, and you can see lots of fields, but I still don't see Stonehenge. But if anybody starts to see Stonehenge, you can shout out or make a note in the chat. I'm standing here with you guys and starting to recognize it because I know it has a parking lot and I know it's, but we're going to come down a little bit closer. At my chat has Stonehenge middle of it, and you can see as we get a little bit closer, you can actually see the rocks. You might be able to see their shadows, but Stonehenge is very hard to see from above because the features are impressive from the side, like you saw in that picture that was behind Mitch in the beginning of the scene. But when you look at it from above, it's a little bit hard to figure out what it is. And you can see people sort of scattered around in that ground, and they're walking around looking at it. But Stonehenge itself is pretty hard to see from above. So here we got it. We can see it there. You guys can see it. I see it. You're cutting it and you're saying you see it. And we're going to we're going to admire Stonehenge a little bit. I don't know if we have a photograph. There we go. We have a photograph. You can see what it looks like from the side. So it's very impressive to see it from the side, but it's super hard to see it from above. So let's try to find something that's a little bit more easy to see from above. And we are now going to go back up into the high altitude, and we're going to cross over towards Egypt. We're going to head towards Egypt. And you can imagine what we're going to be looking for in Egypt. We're going to be looking for the Great Pyramids. And we're going to back out. You see the fields here. You see England. And we're going to back out from the fields. We've got the English Channel. We've got France. And we're going to cross across France. There's the Alps mountains. There we can see Italy. It looks like a boot. We can see the Mediterranean Ocean. We can see North Africa. We can see the Mediterranean here. There you can see the Nile River, and you can see the Nile Delta. The Nile is the green, and the desert is very brown. And then you can see it as we come in a little bit closer, we're near the city of Cairo. And we're seeing the desert is still the brown color. The greenish color is agriculture along the Nile River. But see if you can see pyramids. We're going to see if you could. Let's slow down, Asa. We'll come in a little bit slowly. And I'll invite you guys to look for the pyramids. See if you can see the pyramids. We're coming in slowly. We're relatively near Cairo. And we're looking from above. We're trying to see if we can see pyramids. So we're getting closer. You guys might be able to see them. Again, you'll see the shadows early on. You'll see the shadows. But we're coming in, they're near the lower part of the screen. They're just at the bottom of the screen. And see if you see them. Do you guys see pyramids? Yes, I see people are starting to see them. You can find them. And there's 3 pyramids right here. This is the place, it's called Giza. It's just on the outskirts of Cairo. And the pyramids show up in part because there's a shadow on their side. So they look they're like rectangular or square features. You can see they're sort of got a tippy top to them. And then one side of them is shadowed. The computer will catch up with us here. We'll see a little bit higher resolution. And these are wonderful features. They were made about 5,000 years ago. They're just a little bit shorter than the Washington Monument. They're not quite as tall as the Washington Monument, but they're very big and they show up very dramatically. And you can see their regular pattern. And the pyramids are made of rock. They were made of individual rocks, almost the size of VW vans. The rocks are huge. Again, super hard to move them. And you can climb the pyramid. You have to climb in the dark. So I've climbed the pyramid a couple of times, and I went there in the early morning, about 3:30 in the morning when it was super dark, so I couldn't read that sign. And you climb up the edge of the pyramid right there on the right-hand side. You climb up and you climb right up along the edge of the pyramid, right up that edge, and you get up to the very tippy top right up there, and you can see sunrise from the top. It's a beautiful thing to see. And Napoleon climbed the pyramids a long time ago, and he supposedly carved his name up there. So I was up on top of the pyramid looking for N. There's supposed to be a giant N carved up there that Napoleon carved when he climbed the pyramids, but I couldn't find it. But I did have a beautiful view of Cairo as the sun was coming up, and then I scampered down in the daylight. And it's one of those situations where it's a little bit easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission, because you're really not supposed to climb the pyramids. And I think there's a fence around them now. It's harder to climb them. But we can see maybe another couple of pictures of them from the side so you can see how beautiful they are. And you can see they're made of big stone blocks. And you can imagine climbing up the edge of that. It's not too difficult. You can see the size of the blocks there. They're pretty huge and immense. And again, an amazing feat for the Egyptian people who built these pyramids a long, long time ago. So here you can see, now we're going to look at the territory around. This is the Sphinx, and you can see the top of the Sphinx. The Sphinx's head is on the right. There it is, and his paws are sort of leaning out, and you can go stand at the foot of the Sphinx and ask the Sphinx questions. People ask the Sphinx questions, and the Sphinx always answers with a very small smile, and his answers are very mysterious. We never know quite what the Sphinx is saying, but that's the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is located right next to the pyramids. When you guys go to Egypt, if you get a chance to go to Egypt, you'll definitely visit the Sphinx. You won't want to miss that. So we're going to admire them as we move out. And I just want you to appreciate that you can really see them from space. The pyramids are something that you can see from a great distance up in the air, and partly because they're regular shaped, partly because they have a shadow, and they're a fantastic archaeological feature. But we're now going to go over to the Persian Gulf, which is relatively nearby, and we're going to go to the United Arab Emirates and see other things that people have made more recently and see if we can see them from space. And we're going to give you, again, sort of an opportunity here to sort of see if you see something strange. We're going to come into Dubai. We're in this is the Persian Gulf. Where the United Arab Emirates are here. We crossed over Saudi Arabia. Oman is to the right. And this is the Straits of Hormuz are to the upper right. And we're going to come down into the country of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which are parts of the United Arab Emirates. And I'm asking you to see if you see anything strange or unusual. And you can type it in the chat if you see something strange or unusual here. Again, this is the United Arab Emirates have oil. They're a very wealthy country, but they're in a desert situation. They've got a beautiful ocean right near them, the Persian Gulf. And they're architects and engineers, and they love to be near the water. They don't like to be in the desert. And so you can see what they're doing with their city, and you can see what they're building. See if you see something strange out in the water. There, I see you're seeing all kinds of things. You see circles, you see palm-shaped features, and these are called the Palm Islands. And I've been here, and there are apartment buildings being built out into the Persian Gulf so that everybody has waterfront property. And you can see there's little islands there in the upper right that are in the shape of the world. That's a whole nother story too. But we're going to zoom in on this Palm Island here, and you can see that people are living in apartments on these man-made, they're sort of like promontories, and they've taken the sand from the bottom of the ocean and they've piled it up to make artificial land, and it's a wonderful place to live. And everybody has waterfront property, and it's the cool breezes are blowing and you can see the water, and it's a beautiful place to be. The other thing that they've built in this area is they built some very, very tall buildings. Some of the tallest buildings in the world are in this part of the world now. And we're going to see if we can find the tallest building in the world, which is called the Burj Khalifa. And the Burj Khalifa is over 5 times as tall as the Washington Monument. And we're going to see if we can see it from above. It's a little bit tricky because, again, it's a skyscraper, super skyscraper, but it might have a shadow, but it doesn't look very impressive from above because it's relatively thin and spiky. It's like coming down on a giant spike. And it's sort of right there in the middle. I can hardly see it, and it doesn't have much of a shadow. They built a pond around it because they love the water. So there's a series of ponds around it, and we're going to see if we can get in super close. And I think that we'll be able to resolve a little bit of the building. But when you go there, there's a whole series of elevators, and you wait in line to get in the elevators, and you can't actually get up to the very, very tippy top. You go to various observation platforms, and I've been up to the observation platforms, and the view is magnificent. So here's the building coming into view. We're sort of coming in sideways a little bit. It's a long, tall, skinny building, and it's got palm trees at the bottom. And I think we've got a photograph. Let's see if we can see a photograph of it that's got a palm tree in it. So here's a picture I took from the bottom, and you can see that the building's not much taller than a palm tree, if you think about it. But really, of course, the palm tree is pretty short, and the building is huge and immense. See if we've got another view of the Burj Khalifa seen from the side. Look at how tall and huge it is. and it's about 2,700 feet tall. It's a massively huge building. And question that we often wonder, we say, well, what building is more stable? You know, in terms of how long is it going to last? And some buildings are long, tall, skinny, and other buildings are short, sort of squat, like the pyramids. And the pyramids have lasted 5,000 years. And we're not sure how long some of these tall skyscrapers are going to last, but the pyramid definitely has a very stable configuration or a stable shape and has lasted for a long time and will last for a long time more. We're not quite sure about some of these tall skyscrapers. So here's the Burj Khalifa. We're going to leave the Burj Khalifa and we're going to head out to one last place. We're going to make a big jump across parts of Asia, and we're going to go to China. And we're going to end up our tour in China. And I'm going to be asking you, as we come over towards China again, what kinds of things do you think we'll see from space? We're going to be coming towards Beijing, which is the capital of China. But first, to get there, we've got to back out from the Persian Gulf. You can see we're leaving the Palm Islands behind. This is the Straits of Hormuz. They're crossing parts of Iran there, very dry country. We're crossing parts of Afghanistan, super dry desert country. And we've got the Caspian Sea. We've got parts of we're going to try to find the Himalayas here, but they're just underneath us. So we're crossing over the top of the Himalayas and Tibet, and we're going to be coming down across the Gobi Desert. And we're looking for Beijing, which is the capital of China. And as we come down to Beijing, Beijing is right next to the Great Wall of China. And I'm going to be asking you to think about what do you see as we come down to Beijing? It's a little bit to the left. And we're going to be looking for the city of Beijing. We're going to be looking for whether we see the city, whether we see the Great Wall of China, or whether we actually see the airport. And Asa's got to get himself organized here. It's to the, I'll let you find Beijing. And we're going to, as I ask you to think about it, the city of Beijing is built in an area that's relatively green, and there's green hills behind it, but it has a giant airport, and it's got the Great Wall of China, and the central part of Beijing has some very large square parks and features. And there you go. So it's central left, center left, and there you go. Now that's a lot better, left. And in the center city of Beijing, there's Tiananmen Square, which is a very big plaza. And then there's the old Forbidden City, which is where the emperors lived in Beijing. And the top of the screen there. And we're going to be coming in. As we come in from a distance, I'm asking you sort of, what do you see? And there's a big white thing there on the upper right. And the white thing, which I see first, is actually the airport. So the airport shows up even more distinctively than the city does. And let's take a look at that airport, Asa, so we can just sort of show people what the airport looks like. And it looks a lot like airports. You guys might have been to the Denver International Airport, DIA, and it's got parallel runways, sort of like this. And the runways are very big and they're very rectangular, and they make a very distinctive shape that can be seen from a great distance. So interestingly enough, as we come down into Beijing, the capital of China, the first thing that we can see from space is the airport. And you can see lots of runways there. And you guys can do this on Google Earth. I invite you at home to experiment with Google Earth, because you can find Beijing on Google Earth, and you can find that airport pretty quickly on Google Earth. If we look at the center of town, Beijing has a series of ring roads, and they go right around it. There's 6 or 7 ring roads. It's one of the largest cities in the world, keeps growing bigger. But the city center, which has been there for a very long time, is thousands of years old. We're right smack over it there. If you zoom right in the middle, is you can start to see a sort of a central rectangular area. And the big rectangle is, let's see if we get a little closer. The big rectangle is on the south end, or the lower end, is Tiananmen Square. And then the rectangular area above it, to the north, is the Emperor's City, the Forbidden City. It's got moats around it. So the main white thing in the middle lower part of the screen is Tiananmen Square. And then the Forbidden City, or the Emperor's City, is that area right above it. And if you go to China, when you get there, there's wonderful museums around Tiananmen Square, and you can tour the Forbidden City now. It's a place that tourists can go, and it's a beautiful place to see. And there's wonderful buildings, and the Chinese people have wonderful art in their art museums and wonderful archaeological collections. And I went to a museum here they built the first compass, and the first compass was actually a fancy soup spoon that sits on a fancy polished plate, and the soup spoon was made out of magnetite. And they discovered that the soup spoon would always point north and south. So the first compass, which it's in a museum here in Beijing, it was made of a magnetite, and it was a super interesting thing. The Chinese, of course, also invented paper, and they invented writing, and they invented firecrackers. So all kinds of wonderful things developed in China. But as our last little spot, let's go see if we can find the Great Wall of China, because you guys have said we think we ought to be able to see it from space. And that's what I always thought too. I thought we ought to be able to see the Great Wall of China pretty easily, but let's see if we can actually find it. So Asa, let's see if we go a little bit to the north, and we'll see if we can see the Great Wall of China. And of course, the Great Wall of China is a very long wall. It covers lots of ground, and it was built by many different emperors over the years. So there's lots of different pieces of the Great Wall of China. But if you go to Beijing, there's a sort of a place that people go because it's relatively close to town, and it's super hard to see from above. And it's in this rugged territory here. So the countryside's pretty rugged. You can actually see the roads pretty easily, but the Great Wall of China turns out to be super hard to find from space. And if you guys work on Google Earth, I'd encourage you to use Google Earth and see if you can find the Great Wall of China on Google Earth. And you'll see it if you get close enough, but it is super hard to see. And here you can see the roads pretty easily, but that little wiggly thing on the right-hand side of the roads is actually the Great Wall of China. And I think we've got a picture of it just to remind people what it looks like from the ground. So you can see that it's pretty narrow, and you can see the countryside on either side is pretty much the same. So when you look at it from above, it's super hard to see. But once you pick it up, then you'll recognize it, and you can see it. And I see a question of how long is it? It's certainly hundreds of miles long, and there's actually different strands. It was built in different stages. So some strands are falling apart, other strands have been restored, but it's hundreds of miles long. So there you can see the Great Wall of China on the right and the highways on the left. And the highways are more easy to see than the Great Wall of China. So we're going to thank you guys. Those of you who have just 40 or 45 minutes, we're at about our 40-minute period here. And if you've got to leave class, we understand that, but we want to thank Mitch. We want to thank Asa, Asa's been our pilot. Mitch has been our host at the museum. And we invite you to come to the Denver Museum to see the Stonehenge exhibit. And we're going to have another Digital Earth Academy. It's going to be on April 13th. It's going to be about extreme features on Earth. We invite you to come to those. But we're going to stay a little bit longer, and we'll answer questions if people have questions. And then we've got a couple of other spots up our sleeve. If you've got a chance to stay for a little bit longer, we'll go visit a few more things. But for those of you who have to leave, we understand that. And thank you all very much for coming. So if you have any questions, you might put them in the chat room, and we might have Mitch sort of monitor the chat and see if there's some questions we can answer.
That's right. And I just want to relay, thank you so much for joining us. And if you need to leave, go ahead. Thanks for joining us. One question we got is, where is Asa? Asa, would you pop on the screen and say hello? There he is.
Hello. Thanks for taking Digital Earth Airways today.
We got a lot of questions about how old is Stonehenge? Is that something you know, top of your head?
We can, somebody will find that answer quickly by Googling it, but the Stonehenge is actually, there's a lot of questions about how old Stonehenge is, and recently they have speculated that Stonehenge has been moved a couple of times, and there's some speculation that Stonehenge was built first in one place and then moved to another place. And I think that I see an answer of 448. I think that's a little bit, they're better. 3000 BC is a more realistic number. So Stonehenge is very mysterious. And I invite you to come to the Denver Museum to see our Stonehenge exhibit. But as I've grown up over the years, I've seen many different interpretations for Stonehenge, where the rocks came from, who built Stonehenge, why it was built. And right now, we believe that it has a lot of astronomical alignments. But of course, there's lots of rocks in Stonehenge, so they line up with lots of things. But Stonehenge is a mysterious archaeological feature and a source of continual wonder that they managed to move those rocks so far, hundreds of miles, so long ago, thousands and thousands of years ago.
Very cool, very cool. And people are wondering, do pyramids ever collapse?
So the pyramids are built in such a shape that structure, in fact, one of the most monuments that very part, they need to be
And Bob, you're breaking up a
structure
little bit.
that is,
there you go.
their structure is not, the pyramids do not fall down.
All right. And Bob, you're breaking up a little bit. So I'll just reiterate, the shape is so stable that there are pyramids all over the world, right? There are some in the Americas. There's those ones we looked at in Egypt, and they're very stable and have stood for thousands of years. So somebody asked if Philadelphia is where they make cream cheese.
They also make what is it? The steak. There's a steak. They make a cheese steak. So Philadelphia is a place where they used to make cream cheese. And of course, the Philadelphia cream cheese is famous, but they make cream cheese now in lots of other places, copying the recipe from Philadelphia.
Nice. So yeah, people are wondering, how old are the pyramids? Which I think you mentioned, but
yeah, the pyramids are about 5,000 years old, and if you go to Egypt, there's actually lots of different pyramids. Many different pharaohs made the pyramids. They were made as monuments or as graves for the pharaohs, and they're on the order of 5,000 years old. And if you do travel to Egypt, you can tour many wonderful monuments. The pyramids are just one of the most famous monuments, but you can see the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens. You can go to Luxor and Thebes. So there's a huge number of wonderful things to see in Egypt.
very cool, very cool. And somebody's wondering, do you know what the biggest tree on Earth is? Kind of unrelated, but seems like something you might know.
Well, the tallest trees, we think of the redwood trees in California as being the tallest trees on Earth. They're not as tall as the Washington Monument, but they are super tall. And you guys might have heard many of them were threatened recently by the wildfires in California. And the redwood trees have a very thick bark, and they've withstood wildfires for many thousands of years. The trees are thousands of years old. And so the redwood trees in California, which are probably several hundred feet high, they're probably 400 or 500 feet high. Somebody could pull that out of Google. I always tease everybody and say that there's no more questions, there's only answers, because you can type that into Google and you'll get the answer pretty quickly. So I'm not Googling right now, but if those of you want to Google, you'll find that if you look at redwood tree, you'll find the tallest trees.
Wow. And so are scientists using these techniques we're using today to look for life in outer space?
Well, at this very instant, we have a robot wandering around on Mars, Perseverance, among other robots, but we have a new robot prospector on Mars looking for life or signs of life. And we did look at Mars with telescopes first, and then we looked at Mars from orbiting spacecraft looking for signs of life. So the answer is absolutely yes. We used this exact same technique to look at Mars. We couldn't see any signs of life from above. And so now we've got robots wandering around, and they are looking for fossils. Perseverance is a robot looking for fossils on Mars right now.
Yeah, very cool. And just to clarify, we don't expect to find dinosaur fossils Perseverance is looking for teeny tiny fossils, just whatever evidence of microbial life probably is what we expect. And yeah, so where Asa's still flying, where in the world is he now?
So Asa is in, he's, you guys might recognize the Nile Delta, but Asa, let's go over, if we've got some people that are still with us, we're now in our sort of extra bonus time for those of you who are still with us, and we hope we do have some people. Asa, let's go look at, see if we can find some interesting photovoltaic panels over in China. So we're now going to go back over to the Beijing area, and we're going to go west of Beijing into the area heading towards the Gobi Desert. And the Chinese people have been building photovoltaic electricity generating systems for years. And they have some of the largest ones in the world in this area that ACE is going to take us to. And they've been a little bit playful about the shapes of their photovoltaic panels. So again, we're going to invite you to keep an eye on where we're heading in. And I'm asking you now, as we look for photovoltaic panels, to see if you can see some special shapes. And this is a tricky place to find, and Asa maybe has some landmarks that he can use to guide himself, but he's flying a computer, and you guys can do this at home using Google Earth, but we're going to fly in now, and we're looking for a special set of shapes in the photovoltaic panels here in the area west of Beijing on the eastern part of the Gobi Desert. And a little bit of a tricky business. Asa is looking for landmarks, and the computer is a little bit slow here in terms of its focus, but it will focus up here in a minute. And we're going to go in and see if we can see some special shapes. So Asa's got to organize himself here, and then he'll start to zoom in once he figures out where we're headed. I think it's just on the left-hand side, but you'll remember better than I do. And we've got to sort of wiggle around here a little bit to find it. And this is a good example of how, you know, when you look at from space, a lot of things look pretty similar. It's sort of hard to find specific targets until you start to recognize landmarks. And Ace is going to pick out some landmarks here, and we're zooming in. We're looking for some photovoltaic panels that are in special shapes. And so he's got a better eye than I do, because he's zooming in, and I still can't see anything. Do you guys see anything special about this place? I still don't see it, but I'm sure Ace is heading in for the right place. And the question is going to be, as we get closer, it's starting to resolve now. We're looking at the big gray areas are photovoltaics, and look at the gray shapes here and see what you can see. So you can see something strange now. Do you guys see something strange? Remember, we're in China, and the Chinese people love animals. And what do you see as you look at these photovoltaic panels? And these are just solar panels. So they've put the solar panels in a shape, and it's there. The people are starting to go wild in the chat. They're seeing it. They're seeing it. The chat's going wild. There you go. We can back out. We're almost so close that we're getting too close. There's two of them there, and they are, yes, they see it. There's panda bears. So these are photovoltaic panda bears. Who could imagine? They build panda bears, and you can fly over China. I've done this a lot on Google Earth, and there's all kinds of photovoltaic and solar panels all over the place. But then suddenly you discover panda bears waving at you. So it's pretty fun. So now there's one other thing that we want to show you. One last place we're going to go, and people have asked me a lot about, well, you can see life on Earth, and what kind of life can you recognize on Earth? And I wanted to show you a place that I'm very familiar with, where I used to do geology field work. And it's a place that's got an interesting kind of life that you can see from above, maybe not from space, but from airplane height, you can start to see it. And from balloon, you can definitely see it. And I'm going to ask you to think about a life form. It's not people, it's not man-made. There's another kind of life form that we can see. We're going to go to Wyoming, just north of Denver. Up in the next state north is Wyoming. We're going to go to the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming. We're zooming in now. You've got the Western United States. You've got California, Baja California just went out of view. You've got Great Salt Lake, you'll recognize right in the middle, the blue lake. But we're going to go into the Bighorn Basin, which is just here with the Wind River Basins below. The Bighorn Basin is right there. And we're going to be near the town of Thermopolis, near the town of Warland. And we're going to go to a place where the Bighorn River crosses a beautiful fold. It's called an anticline. Side of that anticline, which is called Sheep Mountain Anticline. And we're going to look for a sign of life. That is, it's the bottom of the screen, just went off the bottom of the screen. And it's a sign of life that you can see from a great distance up, but it has nothing to do with people. And I'm going to ask you to guess what it might be. It's just coming into view at the bottom of the screen there, the very bottom of the screen. Or find your best spot here, Asa, and we'll we'll zoom in on it. And this is an area where the geology is super interesting. You can see the colors of the rocks are very dramatic. There's red colors and green colors. And well, we can go, we're too far north. So they said we've come too far north. Let's go back to Sheep Mountain Anticline. We'll just get oriented. Sheep Mountain Anticline is to the south, go south and go down. And we'll get you to the north end of Sheep Mountain Anticline. And we're looking for a strange life form still further down. There, you're just there. And we'll go into the red part of the tip of that thing. There you go. And we're going to see if we can see some sign of life. And this is something that's a little bit tricky. It depends a little bit on which piece of ground we look at. But this is, we're at airplane elevation now. We're dropping down. We're heading for balloon elevation. And I'm going to be asking you to look for signs of life on the ground. And they're not thermal hot springs. There's actually some creature that's down there organizing the earth, and we can see him from space. So we've got to wait for the computer to catch up with us a little bit. But as we zoom in closer into some of these flat areas, there's some at the top of the screen there, Asa, that are showing up pretty well. I'm asking you to look at those things that look like little round things. Do you guys see them? They're not moles. I see that they're moles. You know, in Africa, actually, naked mole rats are awesome in Africa. They're naked mole rats, and they do make little volcanoes, but these are not moles, and they're not gophers. What do you think they might be? So you can see little round things, and there's a little thing in the middle of the round thing, and they're visible from space. They're not prairie dogs. There's some good guesses coming here. Think of something smaller than a prairie dog and smaller than a gopher. Ants, we got the right answer. Sarah did it. Congratulations, Sarah. These are ant hills in Wyoming, and the ants are very clever. They build themselves a central pyramid shaped feature, which is more like a cone, and very resistant to the wind. And then they harvest stuff around their anthill, and they don't like to live too close to each other. So they're spaced apart, and they can be seen from balloon elevation easily, and even from an airplane if you look very closely. And these are ant hills. So a sign of intelligent life on Earth, they are ants. So we're going to thank you all very much for joining us. We're going to thank Asa for being our pilot, Mitch for being our host. We've got lots of people working behind the scenes. Talia, Kachun, and others are behind the scenes. We've been using a program called Open Space. It's funded by NASA. And we use it at the Denver Museum a lot, but you guys can do this using Google Earth at home. And we welcome any questions in the future. We're going to continue to do these programs about once a month. The next program is scheduled for April 13th, and we're going to be looking at extreme environments on Earth. So we are delighted to have you join us today, and we look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future. And do come to the Denver Museum to see our new Stonehenge exhibit. Bye now, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.